Good. Okay. And we will just jump right in. So my name is Cathy Cooke. I am the founder of Idahoans for Safe Technology. And we are really excited to have Matt Miles with us today. We were actually supposed to have Joe and Matt, Joe Clement and Matt with us, but Joe had to teach. So he had a conflict today, but we're really excited to have Matt with us. And Matt is an award-winning teacher and coach in Northern Virginia for the last 14 years. And together with Joe Clement, he authored the book Screen Schooled: Two Veteran Teachers Expose How Technology Overuse is Making Our Kids Dumber. And that came out in 2017. And since then, he has spoken out about the problems created in screen-dependent children and issues around educational technology. He's authored articles published in Psychology Today, Education Week, Washington Times, and numerous other publications. He and his wife, Dee Dee, have two wonderful kids, ages 6 and 4. So, Matt, awesome to have you with us. So excited to talk with you today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So in my work, I do holistic nutrition work, EMF work, and that means that I am coming at our use of technology from a health standpoint, and I'm more geared towards the EMF exposure. But I think it's really important, obviously, that we address the screen addiction and all of the other issues that we're facing with our reliance on technology. And obviously, that's why we have you here today. And we're really excited to talk about that. So why don't you just kind of lay the groundwork for us and tell us how you got into this topic, or what about this topic encouraged you to write a book?
Sure. So Joe and I have been teaching for a while, and in 2017, which seems like a whole nother lifetime ago, we were leading up to that. We had been lamenting about changes in our students, and they became obviously more distracted with the invention of the smartphone and its ubiquitous use among our students. And not only it kind of became cliche to notice, like, we can't get these kids engaged, we can't get them thinking about stuff, but we also noticed like other cognitive shortcomings, like critical thinking, critical reading. And then the thing that really jumped out to me, at least, was the issues with socialization. Like you could watch students as their social skills really dwindled. We always tell the story of, we have this free period at our school where kids are free to go wherever they want in the building. If they have, if they're failing a class, they need to go to that class, get extra help. If they don't, it's essentially a free period. And just how loud it was the first several years they did that. But by 2013, 14, it was silent. And what you would notice is the kids would come in and they would all just be on their phones. And the only interaction they'd have with each other is like, they'd hold their phones up to the other one, and then they'd go back to like being silent. So it spurred us to think, are these things all connected? Are we seeing like a cognitive shortcoming, socialization issues, or are we seeing those as a result of the increased use of screen technology? And the more we read what was being put out there by experts in neuroscience and psychology, the answer was clear. Like, the psychologists and neuroscientists have been saying for years that there can be obviously negative side or trade-offs to using too much screen time. And meanwhile, we're hearing that, we go looking for that, we find it. We're hearing inundated every day in our profession of educators about the advantages of technology, the advantages of screen time. And we're actually encouraging kids to be on screens. We're making kids join social media. We're putting things on Twitter. We're making them spend most of their day in school on screens. And the rationale is they're doing it at home on screens. So it was that collision of what we knew to be true from our experience and from what we're reading to what we're hearing and being told by educational policymakers that made us kind of push back and write screen schools. So that's the climate that screen schools written in. It's really to argue against the additional pushing of technology in schools.
Yeah. So for everybody listening, and this is going to be recorded and it's going to be posted on my YouTube channel. So for those that don't have a copy of the book Screen School, I highly recommend it. It's a fascinating read, very important information, and I think you can get it. You can get it on Amazon or anywhere, right? The book.
Yeah. It used to be. I think you can get it pretty much anywhere.
Okay, awesome. Because it's really interesting, and you guys talk about a couple myths, right? About kind of what you were just alluding to about how maybe industry and other people in education are saying that. Well, why don't you talk about the myths? I can't do it justice here.
Sure. So there are numerous myths that we talk about. We go into the idea of, like, for example, one of the things we hear a lot of is, wow, isn't it amazing the things that kids are doing on devices? And you see it in like advertisements for different technologies. We often cite, there's an ad that came out a few years ago and I forget what it is, but the kid's always on his phone and they're driving to like their grandparents' house for Christmas, and the kid's on his phone the whole time, and the parents are kind of just getting frustrated because the kid's on his phone at dinner and whatever. And then at the end, he pulls out, he's made a video and everybody cries, and he videotaped them the whole time and put something beautiful together. And that's great. And that would be awesome use of technology. It's just that notion that that's what kids are actually doing is actually not a reality. If you look at the statistics about how kids use technology, they're very rarely being productive. What they are doing are things like entertainment media is the predominant use. So what we call passive consumption, watching videos, listening to music, playing, just a variety of things that they can passively consume. The engaging media is traditionally things like video games, right? Very little of it is educational. Very little of it is actually productive. Only like, I think I want to say, I forget the exact percentage, but like 16%, let's say, is spent in content creation, like, building something digitally or putting together a video presentation or writing or drawing or composing. The valuable things that technology can offer is not what is appealing to kids. It's not what they're doing. And that's the big myth. I think we hear the phrase leverage technology a lot. And, the idea is that take their love and the great things, their love of technology and the wonderful things they're doing on it, and use that for our purposes as teachers. And the reality is you can't, right? I can't put Hammurabi's Code on Facebook and be like, hey kids, I'm so hip, check it out, it's on Facebook. And that's really how it comes off. It's very lame, and whatever. The other idea is meet kids where they are, and it's very much tied to that. If kids are on social media, that's where they are. We as educators should go onto social media and bring education to them, because they're not physically present with us when they're in school because they're somewhere else. We should go in there. And it just misunderstands basic child psychology. Adolescents don't want to be where their teachers are or their parents, right? That's just fundamental to the human existence. So as soon as teachers get on Twitter and start tweeting hip things about, genomes and math, right? That's the moment kids get off Twitter. And that's just basic. So some of the other myths we talk about, multitasking is a big one. We think that kids are listening to us while they're on their phones because they do it so much, they must be good at it. And the reality is that's a total myth. There's no such thing as multitasking. at least for 98% of the population. They're completely incapable of doing two things simultaneously. 2% can do two things at the same time, so very few. And actually, they did a study. The better you think you are at multitasking, there's a negative correlation. It shows that the worse you are at it. So if you think you're good at it, you're probably terrible. But nobody can do more than two things. What kids are actually doing is what they call multi-switching. So they're taking their focus from their device and then they're putting it to their teacher. Device, teacher, device, teacher. And in the meantime, they're missing everything in between. So let's kind of get into it. We talk about the effects of critical thinking and the effects of focus, and those are kind of the myths that we work through.
Cool. It's really interesting to hear you guys talk about how the industry is spinning it, right? So the industry is saying, I mean, the digital divide is the big buzzword, for the past many years, and that this is how kids are learning, and to some degree they'll even say, "Oh no, you talk about video games and how the industry says they're playing video games because they're learning," right?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Like, come on, we know that that's not how it works. It's crazy.
Yeah, the quote you're referring to, I believe, is from he's a computer programmer turned educational critic, Mark Prensky, and we've talked for a while with him, and he's a very smart person. I don't agree with almost any of his opinions, but he believed the quote I think is along the lines of when kids log into video games, they're crying. I think it's from his book, "Leave Me Alone, Mom, I'm Learning," and he says when kids log into video games, they want to know more about the real world, and just point it. That's even if you just think about it for 5 seconds. What is a kid learning about the real world from World of Warcraft or Minecraft, or it's just think about it for 5 seconds.
Or you could go outside and learn about the real world. Right?
Yeah, in the real world.
Yeah. So what have you found about brain development, or things like attention, and just how, or I don't know if you've dug into this really deeply, but how the brain, if there's ramifications of cognitive development?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch. And again, we're not neuroscientists. We worked a lot with neuroscientists when we worked at Susan Greenfield. For example, she's with Oxford neuroscientists. I think it's a pretty good school. And Richard Seidlwick is with George Washington neuroscientists. And so we worked a lot with them, and they're great because they can explain it to a couple of putzes like ourselves. But there's all kinds of ramifications. We're still learning, right? This has been referred to as the largest experiment on humans in history, because the answer is we don't know a lot. There was National Institute of Health is starting to study it. They've collected a lot of preliminary data going back, I think 2 years ago, is when they released the first batch. It was just a batch of preliminary data. And all they did was, it's supposed to be a decades-long longitudinal study on the effects of the brain and relationship to screen use. So they were just releasing their baseline data, and in that alone was alarming, because they would collect data on kids of varying ages, their baseline use of media, and then they would do MRI scans of their brain. And what they found is there's already, just looking at before we even get started with the study, there's already a very strong correlation between media use or screen use and thinning of the cortex, the outer layer of the brain, most responsible for our deeper level thoughts. It's thinning as though it's prematurely aging. I think the quote from one of the neuroscientists on the study was that kids with very high media usage and screen usage have the cortexes of like a 60 or 70-year-old. And what we would suspect that relates to is there's a whole bunch of other studies that have shown corollary relationships between thinning white matter in the brain and underdeveloped prefrontal cortexes and things of that nature. And there's so much corollary data that it seems that there's likely a causal relationship. It's still being studied. We still don't know. It could very well be that kids with underdeveloped prefrontal cortexes are spending more time because they have less executive function. But it seems to a lot of the neuroscientists out there that there may be, in fact, a significant amount of pruning because you have to understand the thing about the brain is the kids are spending the most amount of time on screens in the time in which their brains are doing the most development. This adolescent period is, we know, the most crucial time for developing neural connections and pruning away parts of the brain it doesn't use. So the fact that kids are spending a majority of their waking day, they're spending as much as 8 to 9 hours a day engaged in entertainment media. That's time not spent outside playing, not spent communicating, not spent critically thinking, not spent reading or writing, not spent doing a lot of different things that we know to be more cognitively enriching than playing video games, watching videos on YouTube, watching videos of kids playing video games, right? So it's no wonder it would be common sense to know if there's a principle in neuroscience known as use it or lose it, or what happens is parts of the brain that are going underutilized do what they call prune away, and they unconnect neural connections that aren't being used. And that's happening the most at the ages that kids are spending the most time on devices. And a lot of people have predicted you would see cognitive effects like what we're seeing in this NIH study. So can we say beyond a reasonable doubt that it's a causal relationship? No, but I think it's likely.
The research is strong, and I mean, it's just common sense, right? I mean, really, I don't think any of us, I don't think there's anyone out there that would argue that correlation is not a strong causation. I think.
Well, you can't have causation until you like correlation is step one on the road to causation. So
yeah.
And there's strong causation or correlation there, but yeah.
And so you said that kids are spending 8 to 9 hours on screens for media alone. So in addition to the amount of time they're spending on screens, perhaps while in school or doing schoolwork and other things.
Yeah, so that number's comes out of Common Sense Media. They do a really great job of tracking this, and that number is increasing over the years. So that number was a 2016 number. I know they released another report in 2018, I believe, and they showed about a 30-minute increase in that 2-year span. But that number does not take into consideration time spent in school on media.
Mm-hmm.
So what's gone on in schools during that same time frame is this movement known within education. It has a lot of different names. We call it one-to-one, which every one kid gets one device, be it a laptop or iPad or what have you. And when it was first rolled out, we were told the expectation is kids are on their screens, you're using them. Now they kind of toned that back when they realized kids were spending 8 hours a day on their laptop just at school, and then going home and spending an additional 8 or 9 hours. And a lot of the kids thought it was too much. So they kind of I know my experience is they kind of wheeled that back a little bit. And they said, I mean, I never really did that, but anyway, so yes.
Yeah. So my neighbor is doing yard work, so I apologize if there's some background noise here. Of course, it would happen right now, but I'll keep myself muted except to ask you questions. So tell us about how your book was received by your colleagues.
I don't know. It's weird when it comes to technology. It's almost like a religious experience we talk about. when we would dare to speak out against the notion that it was almost a ubiquitous good, right? There's almost no downside to more technology. It was almost like we were speaking blasphemy. And we were somewhat ostracized, and at points we were fearful for losing our jobs. It was kind of intimated to us that we may be let go if we continued to speak out. It's weird. It's so hard to let go a teacher. But to make it clear the writing's on the wall, you can't can you continue, which is insane if you think about it. Our book, if you read it, it's about children's health. It's about learning better. It's based in, we cited over, I think, 50 different peer-reviewed published studies about children's health and children's well-being. And for there to be, I think we were surprised at the pushback we got from higher ups. And I just kind of thought we'd write a book and people would be like, oh, that's cool. But that's really not how it went at all. But I'm still here, apparently.
Good. Well, good. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. And it's a little bit sad to say that I'm not surprised, and of course that's why I asked the question. And yeah, when you think about it, from you're coming at this from a stance of, I want what's in the best interest of our kids. So why would anybody have any pushback at all? It's really frustrating, but I imagine, and that's the work that I do too. I had this experience where my EMF exposure was causing me severe tinnitus and anxiety and insomnia. And once I fixed it, I was like, oh my God, I feel better. So I was like, oh, well, let me tell people about this. And I thought people would go, oh, that's cool. Instead, I got, massively attacked of I'm quackery and, the whole thing. So I'm curious why you think that is. Why was there pushback?
It's hard I don't know. I don't want to speculate other people's motivations, but there are a lot. Most people in education get into education because they want to help people. They want to help kids specifically. So I'm certain that many people believe in the message of its inherent goodness and preparing kids for the 21st century. And I'm sure people looked at us as, I know for a fact they looked at us as like naysayer, contrarian types who are just trying to keep the good old days because that's how we had it. And that's really not at all our perspective. Joe and I are not anti-technology, and it's interesting. I was for a while our tech lead for our department, and I was responsible for teaching everybody in the department the different types of software we're expected to use. So and Joe has a side business that's entirely rooted in database, and he does his own computer programs. And we're both two people who are very technically savvy people, maybe not like extremely tech savvy, but we're pretty, I would say, above average tech. So again, we're not anti-technology. What we're against is anything that disrupts or gets in the way of human interactions. We think that there is value to it, technology, yes, but first off, is it valuable just because it's technological? And the answer is no. There's a lot of crap out there, and I'm all over the place, sorry. But we saw that firsthand in 2019, 2020, when we went to a purely virtual educational existence. A lot of the stuff people saw firsthand, we're inundated with all this stuff that's been sold to us as the future of education. And we're like, all right, here it is. It's your chance to shine. And it was just an absolute spectacular failure of education. So we look at it from a standpoint of, one, it's not very effective. And two, kids, there's value to the things that we're getting rid of that we're not even considering. Human interaction, for example, the teacher-student human interaction. There's all kinds of research out there that shows the more personal of a not to a certain extent, the more connected a teacher is with a student, the better educational outcomes you get. So that's kind of the directive we're going. If you can, I use a PowerPoint, I use a projector, I use those tools. They're not inherently evil. And I could, if I just put my head in my if I had an old school podium and notes and I just buried my head in it, that would be just as bad, right? We're arguing for a very connected style of teaching that's more beneficial to kids and encourages the things that we know to be beneficial.
Yeah, that's great. Well, you're exactly right. I mean, we could have, you know, all we could have is paper and pens, but if we're not interacting with the students, we don't have a good teaching style, then it's just as bad. So what goes on in your school as far as, are kids allowed to have their phones in classes? I mean, are they not supposed to? How does that work?
So this always comes up. The rule of the school now is that it's up to the teacher's discretion. Some teachers will use it in class. You know, they'll put a QR code up and link it to a form that they can then answer a quiz question or something. And then the other issue is a lot of parents want their kids to have constant access to their phones. And the rationale we hear the most often is, what if there's an emergency? What if there's a school shooter, whatever? So a lot of parents are resistant to the idea of disconnecting their kids from themselves throughout the day. So most schools will, at least in the areas that I'm familiar with, they're reluctant to create an all-out no phone policy. There's a lot of parent pushback, and most schools are very interested in what parents have to say. So then it's really left up to the teachers. I can tell you that in my class, I've gone on both ends of the spectrum. I've collected their phones. I've had them put their phones away. And then I've also taken a very laissez-faire approach where I say, you know what, if you want to miss everything and play on your phone all day, you're a senior, you do you. And you'll see the results. I kind of adopt a medium ground today. The problem is, if you collect phones, there's a liability issue. So this is why we're told not to. If I put them all, I have like a little, I don't know if you can see it, but it's across my room. You can't see it, but it's like one of those old school shoe holders the kids could put their phones in. Mm-hmm. The problem is if it falls off the wall, because they each have 8-pound brick phones, right? And they all smash. I'm liable because I collected it for all the, talk about your salary. So a lot of the admin push back, don't collect their phones. There's a liability issue. There's legal issues. There's parental issues. There's parent. So at this point, it's, if I see it out, because I'll ask them to put it away. But if that's the route and here's the problem. If that's the route you take as a teacher, one, they're so addicted to their phones. I'm putting myself at an adversarial role with them, and I'm disconnecting myself. And two, it's all I'm going to do all day. I'm not going to be able to convey anything because it's going to be, hey, put your phone away. Anyway, wow. Put your phone away. So I don't know. The answer is, I don't know how to deal with it.
That's incredible. I wouldn't have thought about each of those issues. I would have thought, I mean, I've always thought like, gosh, if I was a teacher, I would just tell them not to have their phone, but it just doesn't work like that, clearly. So phone addiction is, you say that 50% of teens say that they're addicted to their phone, right?
I think that's the stat. Yeah, it's a significant number of kids will tell you, this is self-reported. Yes. They'll tell you that they feel addicted to their phone.
Which means it's much higher because so many people are not going to admit it.
Correct.
And I mean, how many adults are not addicted to their phone? I mean, we know that the technology is made purposefully to be addicted so that we use it. That's
correct.
Pretty frightening. Gosh. So you have 2 kids. Mm-hmm. What's your philosophy? I mean, they're young, right? Pretty young kids.
Yeah, one just turned 6 yesterday, and then the other's 4 and a half.
Right. I mentioned that. Okay, so you're not quite there yet. But do you have thoughts about what you're going to do with them and how they're going to be, whether or not they're going to, you're going to have this accessibility at home or what you're going to do there?
Our policy so far is just avoidance. Our kids, we don't own an iPad, so there's not one in our house. I can tell you my parents have many. And it's their favorite thing to do when they're at grandma and grandpa's. And it's a little frustrating from my perspective because they know my policy, but otherwise they wouldn't know what an iPad was, and they live a pretty normal childhood. They play with each other, they have toys, they have games, they go outside, they ride bikes, they go to a creek, whatever. And they don't know what they don't have. They're kind of getting an inclination now. A lot of their friends, and this is where it becomes really challenging, right? It's when they leave the home. I can control my home, but I would say that most kids their age have iPads, or at least access to an iPad, and are very familiar with iPads or laptops. I mean, my kid is going into, he went into kindergarten last year. They gave him a laptop. Now, a laptop's not as addictive and useful for entertainment media as an iPad, but there are many schools who do iPads for kids. So if you're a parent like me and you don't want your kid to have access to screens, you don't really have a choice. They didn't ask, can I give your kid an iPad or can I give your kid a laptop? So schools are doing this, and that's, extra frustrating as a teacher as part of this. But, our policy is we're going to delay the phone as long as we humanly possibly can. And then when it becomes time that we need connection, there are dumb phones out there, the opposite of smartphones. They're phones that can just call and text and used as phones as we knew them in high school and prior. So that's our plan. The biggest issue is, most families will tell you peer pressure, right? There's the kid, I look in the audience as we're talking about these dumb phones, and you can see the looks on the kids' faces, and I feel bad for them because we've just helped ostracize that poor kid, because you hear the kids making fun of other kids for not only they'll have Androids instead of iPhones, and people won't talk to them because it turns their text threads green instead of blue or whatever. So it's like the old school, it's what makes you fit in your phone and the type of phone. And our hope is that they're so grounded by the time we eventually cave in, right? Hopefully high school, hoping to hold out till late high school, that they have the cognitive skills, they have the social skills, they have those that makes technology useful. A child doesn't have those underlying cognitive skills that improves technology use. So that's our plan. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, good luck. I mean, that's one of the things for me as an EMF consultant. I'm going into people's homes and I'm identifying what their exposures are, and I'm helping them to reduce it. And there's a lot we can do, and we can hardwire their internet, and you can even plug your phone in. There's so much you can do, but the sticking point is I've got a teenager, and forget it, because I can really, I don't have children, but I can't imagine how difficult that would be, because you don't want your child to be ostracized. And of course they're going to be, but you don't want them to have, all of these issues that we're talking about either. That's a very difficult place to be. I wish there were solid answers for that.
No, and it's one of those things where and I get it, and I hope I don't ever come across as judgy or whatever. I get the difficult position parents are in and teens are in, and I totally get that. And it's not until this movement, there wasn't a big pushback against kids smoking. I mean, even in the 80s, schools were building smoking courts for kids with the rationale of, well, that's what they do. They smoke. So you know what? Go smoke in the courtyard. So you stop smoking in the bathroom. And that's kind of, they just threw their hands up. And it was, the research in the 80s was out there, in the 70s and 80s. It's not like people thought it was good for you. And now the funny thing, it's not funny, but smoking is not even cool anymore for kids. It's not like kids are vaping is cool, but smoking is, kids will tell you that's disgusting. And so mission accomplished. We're not there with screens, and we're not even close. Well, hopefully this is the beginning of the process. We're starting to, and I think this is one of Joe and I's biggest missions, is we're starting to consider, people are starting to consider the fact that this isn't a ubiquitous good. This isn't, there are side effects to spending all day on media use. And, you know, we have lost, there are opportunity costs of things that they no longer have time for. So let's consider what we've done to children, and then let's start kind of pushing back. And then eventually we'll get to a point where it's movement, right? I don't want to sound like a, you know, a revolutionary, but you know, it'll eventually grow, and people keep talking about it. We'll realize we've been doing wrong by kids for a long time, and we'll demand better. And I think that's how change happens.
Yeah, I think you're right. I agree with that totally. It takes time. And we've got a lot of obstacles to this because, and what I think, when I asked you the question earlier, you know, why do you think you've gotten some pushback? But I think that schools get a lot of financial support from the industry. You know, we're going to give you 1,000 iPads for your school. Well, or grant money or whatever it is, because you're using our technology. That's a pretty big incentive to use their technology. And so if you're a school administrator and you're gonna try to change the way people are doing things, you could take a financial hit. And also, you know, another point here is adults really like their phones. Yeah. And if we say, you know, this is a bad idea for us to be on screens all day long, then we have to face our own use of screens. And I don't think a lot of people are willing to do that because it's painful. Right?
Well, and I can tell you too, so I don't, in my, most of my friends are maybe unaware of the fact I even wrote a book. And when they find out, there's normally like this defensive reaction. And then they'll make their point of, well, my kid's just going for, you know, and it's funny, I don't even say anything. And they'll throw iPads at their kids, and then they'll turn to me and say, oh, they just get 5 minutes a day or whatever. I didn't say anything, I'm not judging, but I will say there is a lot of cognitive dissonance. I think most people think about their kids spending their 5-year-old spending 4 or 5 hours on an iPad playing God knows what, or having their own YouTube channel and publishing videos to God knows whom. And they understand that's bad, but at the same time, and I totally get this from, again, I'm not coming off as judgy, it makes life easier, right? I can hand my kid an iPad and I get peace and quiet, and I can make dinner and I can do some of the things, and my kid is over there as happy as a clam, content. And I know when I pull her away, it's screaming, crying. So I get that predicament, but you know, in the same way that it makes parenting easier, it makes education easier, right? It's not necessarily better. It's just, it's mental pacification, right? The kid is quiet and content. So continue.
Yeah, that's an important point. And I want to say too, like, you know, I'm not anti-technology at all. I mean, look at what we're doing. This is amazing that we can have people from all over the country, even people from other countries, meet and see each other and talk. It's awesome. But we just got to be responsible about it. And we got to do it in ways that is of benefit rather than causing all of these issues that we're talking about. And I'm glad you mentioned, like, you're not trying to be judgy. Neither are any of us. We just want to bring awareness to the issue. And that's why, you know, I'm so grateful for your book. And I agree with you that this is how the conversation starts. And we have to have the conversation so that we bring more awareness to it. So eventually we can come around and say, oh yeah, we're not really doing things the smarter way. So let's adjust. And, you know, hopefully we'll come to that point. There have been some developments very recently that I think are encouraging. And I don't know if, you know, a couple, maybe almost 2 weeks ago, there was a lawsuit against the FCC. And I don't know if you saw this, but a couple of nonprofits sued the FCC because they refused to look at the scientific data showing that this technology can have negative health consequences. And all of the FCC's guidelines are based from data from the 1990s. And they recently said, yeah, we don't really need to look at this pile of research showing that there are negative health effects because our guidelines from 1996 are still satisfactory. So they got sued from these nonprofits, and the court actually sided with the nonprofits and said, you can't ignore this, thousands and thousands of research studies showing that there is negative harm from our screen use. It's mainly coming from an EMF point of view, but it's equally as important, what we're talking about here. So that was really big news, that the FCC has to go back now and look at this scientific information. So I think there is a movement and there is a lot more awareness about it happening. So I'm hopeful about that. And, your guys' book, having this conversation, I think is very, very important so that we have these conversations to raise more awareness. I want to open up this up to questions from our audience, but first I'm wondering if you have any other tips about solutions or things that we can do until that kind of tipping point happens.
I saw some chat questions pop up and about kids being required to get devices for school, and here's what I would say, and I see the problem firsthand. I'm part of the problem, right? Well, I'm part of the institution that's the problem, but I would never let, if I were to assign a homework assignment that involved eating hot dogs and I had a kid raise his hand, so I'm not allowed to eat pork, I wouldn't ever say, no, this is homework, you go do that. It's ridiculous, right? If I said you have to stay up every night and diagram the stars at 1 a.m., right? Parents could say, well, that's my kid's bedtime, so no thank you, right? Schools should not be impacting, I guess my point is schools should not impact what the limits that are going on at home. If I think it's perfectly reasonable for a parent looking at the information regarding tech use for them to want to limit their kids' tech use. And we know that once you introduce that tech use into school or into the home, the kid is going to use it likely, or it's more likely they're going to use it unproductively. So schools have to allow parents to opt out of things like this. And I'm not saying that they legally have to, I'm saying that they should have to. There should be a moral obligation of schools to acquiesce to parents who don't want this for their kids. And there should never be a scenario, I think I read it, that a school requires a kid to buy a smartphone. The answer just has to be no. Obviously, no. The answer is no to that, and I refuse to do it on solid grounds. I have a lot of research backing this up. So that's my philosophical take on it. I don't think a school should ever dictate a home policy, and I think a lot more homes should have policies that limit kids' screen time. So that's my take on that. And if I'm a parent, I'm going to push back. And you'd be surprised the amount of sway parents have over schools. It's remarkable. Sometimes it's not always productive, but school parents push. They oftentimes can make a change, even a small group of parents.
Yeah, good point. So it starts at home. And yeah, it starts with parents for sure. It's going to be very interesting over the next, decade or so to see kind of how this progresses. I think if we continue to see these social, behavioral, cognitive challenges, I mean, we're gonna have to do something. I mean, I think that school educators, school administrators, I don't think there's going to be a choice because we're just going to see it. I'm hoping.
Or it'll just be such the new norm that it just goes unnoticed.
Well, I know.
It's the movie Idiocracy.
Yeah, yep. I agree. It's true. As well, but adult brains are suffering too, right? So
absolutely.
we're not going to notice. I mean, we're not going to notice. Yeah, Idiocracy is a pretty fascinating movie. I didn't like it when I saw it, but as the years went on, I was like, wow,
It's prophetic. It's funny how
is.
prophetic it
It
became.
really is. It really is. Yeah. Okay, so if anybody on the call, if you've got a question, if you want to raise your hand, you do that by going to the bottom of your screen, and there's a little reactions button where you can raise your hand. That would be awesome. Yeah, we did have a couple of comments in the chat. Yeah, I guess we're just talking about you mentioned it, you addressed those. I'm going to put a link to the website of the book. If anybody wants to go check that out, like I said, I really highly recommend that you get the book. It's got a lot more information than we're able to cover in our short time today. But it is a really, really great read. And how do you feel, Matt, about people getting the book, giving it to their PTA, their school administrators? I mean,
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if we're going to make change here, having a book like that, which is heavily referenced, because what everybody wants to see the science now, you can't just talk about it. You got to show them the data. You gotta prove it, so to speak. And with your work in psychology, and just anecdotally, you being a teacher, I think that's very important for people to see. So Carla said her friend who's a middle school teacher retired at 52 because of the huge increased behavioral problems for the past 3 years. And I have a neighbor just lives across the street, and actually they're both teachers. The husband and wife are both teachers, and they have said just what you're saying since about the mid 2015 or so, that the behavior issues are kind of off the charts. Anecdotally, do you see that? I mean, I know you mentioned like a lot of things have gotten quiet because people are on kids are on their phones, but what about the behavior besides?
I mean, I'm fortunate enough to teach at a fairly affluent school, in a student population that's fairly driven and motivated. So, and I teach older kids too.
Yeah.
So as far as like misbehaving and behavioral issues along those lines, like lashing out, I don't personally see a lot more than before. But I never saw that. I do see kids less able to control their emotional state. I do see kids lashing out in ways that they may not have, not to the point where it crosses the line per se, but inability to communicate with others. But the part that I see a lot amongst the student population I have is anxiety and depression. Our student population is riddled with anxiety. It's riddled with, as is everybody right now, but this has been a long time coming, pre-COVID. So that's what we're seeing on our end is just the anxiety and depression, almost to the point where it's debilitating. There's almost nothing you can do as a teacher without some kid having to opt out because it causes some sort of, we were just talking about this a couple minutes ago. There's a name for it, of course, but students who the tapping of a pen during a test is they actually have enough of these cases now that we're having to learn about it, or sniffles during a test. It's causing kids anxiety attacks. So we have to talk about ways to address students with this type of hyper anxiety. Now, is that entirely related to technology? I think it's related. Is there other factors involved? I'm sure there are, but we didn't see this before the invent of the smartphone. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, you don't got to convince me. I mean, and I would say, I mean, there's an EMF component to it as well, right? Like, you know, if we wanted to nerd out about the cellular impact that our radio frequency has on our cells, I mean, there's voltage gated calcium channels. The EMF artificially opens the voltage gated calcium channels. Calcium floods in to the cell where it should not be. And then we get oxidative stress, and calcium is very excitatory. So I think a lot of this anxiety, both from the screen addiction and the EMF exposure, is causing a lot of these, you know, anxiety and depression issues, both physiologically and psychologically. So, and I mean, I can't tell you how many times when I've had people reduce the use of their phone or shield it or use it smarter or use it plugged in so they can reduce that EMF. One of the first comments I get is, oh my God, I'm so much less anxious. So they're still using it, but they don't have the radio frequency. And, you know, I think that's a big piece. Obviously, I think that's a big piece of this topic, because we're getting it, like I said, psychologically and physiologically, which is, we're just getting hit from both sides in a huge way. So yeah, we got a difficult battle in front of us, but
yeah.
You know, we're gonna do our best by having conversations like this, right?
That's the hope.
Yeah. So another thing that you mentioned is this concept of the digital native, and I'm wondering if you can just talk on that real quick. We've only got a couple more minutes, but I think that'd be kind of a good thing to
Yeah, so this also stems back to Mark Prensky and this notion that kids born into the digital era are going to be more almost superhuman, right? Their access to information and their access to social media and all these technological advances is going to make them smarter, more knowledgeable, more sociable, more connected in ways, more empathetic, all these things. And the reality is we're finding the opposite, right? And I would go back to this idea, it misunderstands technology. Technology is by definition something that makes life easier. In other words, it enhances skills that we already have, right? So you and I can use Zoom or social media because we grew up socializing. So we learned social cues and we learned how to communicate in real world and read body language and read tone and do all these things that we just kind of take for granted. A child never learned that, right? So when they're doing a majority of their communication via the very one-dimensional social media, where there's no facial cues, there's no sound or intonation, there's no understanding of sarcasm or jokes, or sorry, that's the bell. They're not enhancing existing skills, rather they're replacing skills. They're replacing the very dynamic face-to-face conversation with something that's far inferior, and they don't have those underlying skills to use it productively. Why do we see social media being used like it is? Somebody tell me, you know, go on social media and tell me it's as good as in person. Why do we have cyber? Why am I doing an anti-bullying lesson every other day? Why do kids do the things they do? What is going on in these different settings? So yeah, and that's just one example. The problem is these digital natives don't have a lot of these underlying skills that technology is used to enhance. They don't use technology like we do. Older people who had to learn how to do things on their own, they use it to rather replace skills.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, sounds like we got to let you go because you got schooling to attend to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so grateful, Matt, for your time. This has been amazing. Everybody, please pick up the book. It's an excellent read. I strongly encourage it. And where can we find out more about you?
So we have a website, screenschool.com, where we post kind of things like this or articles we've written or things. So you can find stuff there.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Matt. We really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining. We'll see you next time.